Disclaimer: it's inspired by reality, shaped by imagination.
What happens when Hollywood royalty collides with one of America's most controversial conservative voices, live on national television? When Julia Roberts sat across from Ben Shapiro on The View, no one expected the conversation to spiral into one of the most unforgettable cultural clashes ever broadcast. Julia, elegant and unflinching, challenged Shapiro on his rigid takes about culture, morality, and women's roles in society. At first, the exchange was tense but civil. But as the cameras rolled, the debate escalated, becoming a fiery battle of worldviews, empathy versus ideology, lived experience versus abstract arguments. The audience gasped, the co-hosts scrambled to contain the chaos, and social media exploded in real time. And when Ben Shapiro, visibly shaken and unable to defend himself, finally stood up, red-faced, and walked off the set, millions of viewers knew they had just witnessed television history. This wasn't just a clash of personalities, it was a cultural reckoning, raw and unscripted.
The stage lights glowed brightly inside ABC's The View, casting a crisp sheen across the round table where countless cultural battles had been fought before. On this particular morning, however, the atmosphere felt heavier than usual. Julia Roberts sat with her trademark poise, her calm smile radiating a confidence that seemed effortless. Across from her sat Ben Shapiro, dressed sharply in a tailored suit, leaning forward with his hands clasped as if bracing for a courtroom-style debate. The introduction was polished, even cordial. Whoopi Goldberg, acting as moderator for the day, set the tone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've got two big names at the table today. Actress and activist Julia Roberts and political commentator Ben Shapiro. Today we're talking culture, how it shifted, where it's headed, and what that means for America." The audience applauded. Some cheers louder for Julia, though Shapiro had his loyalists scattered in the crowd. Julia was the first to speak, her voice warm but steady. "I think culture should evolve," she said. "It should reflect compassion, inclusivity, and the complexity of real lives. That's why I've always been vocal about things like equality and representation. Art, and by extension society, is at its best when it mirrors empathy." Shapiro nodded slightly, his tone initially measured. "I respect that," he replied. "But here's the reality. Culture can't just be about feelings. It has to be rooted in structure and tradition. When we abandon the values that made society strong, we end up in chaos. Modern culture celebrates victimhood instead of responsibility, and that's not progress, that's regression." The tension was subtle at first, the kind that crackles just beneath the surface. Julia's lips curved to a polite smile, but her eyes narrowed slightly. She responded carefully, as though picking her words with precision. "Ben, no one's abandoning values. We're expanding them. The world looks different than it did 50 years ago. Families are different, communities are different, opportunities are different. Holding on too tightly to an old definition of values risks shutting people out rather than lifting them up." The audience broke into applause at her words. Shapiro leaned back slightly, lips pressed thin, waiting for the noise to subside. Whoopi tried to ease the growing friction. Okay, we're starting strong today," she joked, but her eyes darted between them like a referee who knew the game was just beginning. For the next few minutes, both guests kept their tones measured, but every exchange sharpened the divide. Julia's words painted a vision of compassion-driven progress. Ben's arguments drew firm lines of tradition and structure. Neither raised their voice, but neither gave ground either. The civility held, but just barely. The audience could feel it. the sense that politeness was only a thin veil over something much bigger brewing beneath the surface. By the time the segment cut to its first commercial break, Julia and Ben were both smiling for the cameras, but their eyes told a different story. This was only the beginning. The politeness was fragile, and the unease in the room suggested it wouldn't last long. When the cameras came back from commercial, the air in the studio felt thicker, as though everyone was leaning forward, waiting for the next strike. The polite introductions were over. Now the real clash began. Ben wasted no time picking up where they left off. His voice was sharper now, faster, the kind of cadence that left little room for interruption. Julia, I think the problem here is that Hollywood elites, people in your circle, push narratives on Americans that simply don't align with reality. It's easy to sit in Beverly Hills and talk about inclusivity, but the average working-class family in, say, Ohio or Oklahoma doesn't benefit from this cultural engineering. They suffer when traditional values are undermined. Julia blinked, her smile fading into a look of pointed disbelief. She leaned forward slightly, her hands folded on the table. Ben, do you hear yourself? You're talking about people like they're pawns in some grand cultural war. Families in Ohio and Oklahoma and everywhere else aren't made of cardboard cutouts. They're real people with real struggles, and they don't all fit into your narrow idea of what a family should look like. The audience clapped, some even cheering. Shapiro shifted in his seat, but pressed on. I'm not saying families aren't real, Julia. I'm saying societies thrive when they're built on objective truths. A man and a woman raising children, that's the backbone of civilization. When you start telling people that every version of family is equally valid, you're rejecting thousands of years of proven structure. Julia shook her head, her voice steady but more forceful now. That's where you lose people, Ben, because love and commitment, not gender rules, are the backbone of civilization. My kids, your kids, anyone's kids. They thrive when they're loved and supported, period. You can't erase that truth just because it doesn't fit your script. Joy Behar chimed in, half joking, but with an edge. Well, Ben, I guess Julia just said your objective truth is stuck in the Stone Age. The crowd erupted with laughter, but Ben wasn't smiling. He raised a hand, his tone growing more defensive. See, this is exactly what I'm talking about, mockery instead of debate. The left loves to call people Stone Age when we're simply defending timeless principles. That's not progress, that's arrogance. Julia didn't flinch. She leaned in, her eyes locked on his. And hiding behind timeless principles while ignoring how the world has changed, that's not wisdom, Ben. That's fear. Fear of what happens when people you don't approve of find their voice, their rights, their place in society. The applause was thunderous. Some audience members even stood, clapping as Julia's words landed. Shapiro attempted to regain the upper hand, his words firing faster, his frustration barely veiled. Julia, with all due respect, feelings don't change facts. Just because you want to rewrite history doesn't mean it suddenly becomes true. You say you want compassion, fine, but compassion without boundaries leads to moral chaos, and Hollywood loves moral chaos. Julia's expression hardened, the warmth giving way to steel. What you call moral chaos, Ben, I call progress. Women voting was once chaos. Interracial marriage was once chaos. Same-sex couples adopting was once chaos. And yet all of those things made society stronger, not weaker. The real chaos comes when people like you insist on holding everyone else hostage to your fears. The room broke into applause again, louder than before. Shapiro's jaw tightened, his hand gripping the edge of the table as though to steady himself. Whoopi, sensing the energy spike, tried to interject. All right, let's all take a breath. But Ben cut in quickly, his voice rising just enough to drown her out. It's easy to sit here and be cheered for saying the popular thing, but popularity doesn't make it right. If the foundation of society collapses because we traded truth for applause, what good is your progress then? Julia, her voice firm and clear, delivered the line that made the audience roar.
If your so-called foundation can't withstand equality and compassion, Ben, maybe it was never strong to begin with." The reaction was explosive. Cheers, whistles, and clapping that shook the studio. Shapiro tried to speak, but the noise drowned him out. For the first time, a flicker of unease crossed his face. The tension was no longer subtle. The debate had officially escalated, and the audience knew it was only a matter of time before one of them cracked under the pressure. The atmosphere in the studio was electric. The audience wasn't just watching, they were leaning into every word, gasping, clapping, even booing at points. And in the center of it all, Julia Roberts and Ben Shapiro sat locked in a duel that no commercial break could soften. The moderator, Whoopi Goldberg, tried to bring some order. Okay, let's slow down. We've got two very different views here, and both deserve to be heard." But Ben wasn't interested in slowing down. His voice cut through with the sharpness of someone who felt his grip slipping. "Julia, with all due respect, you're a phenomenal actress, but that's what you are, an actress. You tell stories for a living. I deal in facts. And the fact is, a society that abandons traditional family values eventually crumbles. That's not my opinion, that's history." The air turned icy. Julia's eyes widened slightly, as if she couldn't believe he had gone there. The audience audibly gasped, and Joy Behar's mouth dropped open. "Wow," Joy said, shaking her head. "Did you just try to say Julia doesn't get to have a voice because she's an actress? Because last time I checked, Ben, you're not exactly a historian yourself. You're a political pundit with a microphone." The crowd roared with laughter, but Julia didn't laugh. She leaned forward, her voice lower now, more personal. "Ben," she said slowly, "you don't know the first thing about my life. You see actress, but you don't see the woman who worked 3 jobs before Hollywood, who raised kids as a single mom for a time, who watched people she loved fight for their right to be who they are. You want to talk about history? Let's talk about the history of people like you dismissing voices like mine, women, artists, mothers, as if we're just window dressing in the real story written by men. Well, newsflash, we've been writing it too. You just haven't been listening." The audience erupted, cheers, applause, even a few people shouting, "Yes!" Ben, his face flushed now, tried to push back. "That's not what I said, don't twist my words. I'm saying you're speaking from emotion, not from data. Society can't be run on feelings. It has to be built on order, structure, objective truth." Julia didn't flinch. She leaned closer, locking eyes with him. "And who gets to decide what that objective truth is, Ben? You? Some book written centuries ago? Or the millions of families who live it every day in ways you don't approve of?" Ben's words came faster, more defensive, almost desperate now. "Biology decides. Reality decides. A family is a mother and a father, period. Everything else is a deviation, a choice society pretends is normal to make people feel better." That was it, the line that shifted the room from heated debate to emotional explosion. The crowd gasped loudly, some booing outright. Joy slapped her table on the floor. "Ben, do you even hear yourself? You're sitting here telling millions of Americans their families don't count. Single parents, grandparents raising grandkids, LGBTQ couples, and you think you're the moral authority? That's cruel. That's insulting." Julia's face flushed, but not from anger, from passion. Her voice broke slightly as she spoke, raw and unguarded. "You know who you're talking about, Ben. My sister. She raised her kids alone after her husband left, and those kids grew up stronger, kinder, and more successful than most. You know who else? My friends who adopted their little boy after he was abandoned. That child is loved every single day, more than some kids with a mom and dad ever get. Don't you dare sit there and tell me those families are deviations. They are miracles." The audience went wild, standing ovations, whistles, clapping so loud it drowned out the microphones. Ben's face was red,
his lips pressed tight as though he was holding back words he couldn't shape without making it worse. For the first time, he looked rattled, unsure of his footing. Julia leaned back, exhaling deeply, but her eyes never left his. "You came here to win an argument, Ben. I came here to speak the truth of people's lives. And the difference is, I don't need charts or cherry-picked history to prove it. I've lived it. They've lived it. And their truth is stronger than your fear." The studio was on fire with applause. The tension had boiled over, the emotional lines drawn, and though Ben tried to collect himself, the weight of Julia's words lingered, pressing down like a truth he couldn't shrug off. The studio felt like a powder keg, and Julia Roberts had just lit the match. Her words about real families, her sister, her friends, children loved beyond measure, still echoed as the crowd thundered. Ben Shapiro sat rigid, hands clasped so tightly his knuckles turned white, his trademark rapid-fire composure slipping. Whoopi Goldberg raised a hand, trying to cut through the chaos. Okay, folks, let's breathe for a second." But the crowd wasn't calming. They were energized. Every clap, every cheer, seemed to chip away at Ben's armor. He finally leaned forward, his voice sharp, but cracking at the edges. "You all don't get it. I'm not the villain here. I'm pointing out reality. If we keep redefining family, if we keep bending every institution to satisfy feelings, society will collapse. That's not cruelty. That's common sense." A chorus of boos rang out, loud and unrelenting. Whoopi Goldberg threw up her hands dramatically. "Ben, do you hear yourself? You're literally lecturing America while America is telling you you're wrong. Look around this audience. Look at the response. You're not just losing an argument, you're losing the people." The camera panned across the studio, catching women and men on their feet, clapping, shaking their heads at Ben. The divide was stark, and he was on the wrong side of it. Julia, calm but unwavering, turned to him again. "Ben, nobody's asking you to abandon your values, but you don't get to define everyone else's lives by them. Love doesn't collapse societies, hate and exclusion do. And right now, what you're offering isn't protection, it's rejection. And the country's tired of it." The audience roared with approval, some chanting her name. "Julia! Julia!" Ben's face went crimson. He shuffled his notes, trying to regain ground, but the sound swallowed him. He opened his mouth, started to speak, but the boos drowned out his words. He looked to Whoopi, perhaps for a lifeline, but even she seemed to sense the tide had turned. "Ben," she said gently, "sometimes when everybody's telling you the same thing, you gotta ask yourself, maybe they're right and you're not." That cut deeper than any applause line. His jaw tightened. For a brief moment, he looked small, cornered, outnumbered, exposed. "I'm not," he started, but the words faltered. He tried again, faster this time, his voice rising. "I'm not ashamed of telling the truth. You all just don't want to hear it." But his tone wasn't conviction anymore. It was desperation. Joy leaned in, her voice sharp as a knife. "No, Ben, the truth is standing ovations for Julia Roberts. The truth is tears in the eyes of audience members who've lived the families you dismiss. The truth is, today, you lost." That was the breaking point. Ben froze, lips pressed tight, his eyes darting as if looking for an escape hatch. And then, with the cameras rolling, he pushed back his chair, stood up, and muttered something into his microphone, half audible, half swallowed by the crowd. "I don't have to take this circus. If you're not interested in facts, then this is pointless." The boos cascaded louder as he turned, grabbed his papers, and strode off the set. Julia didn't gloat. She simply sat back, composed, watching him leave with a quiet strength that said more than any words could. The audience, however, erupted, clapping, cheering, some standing on their feet. Twitter was already exploding, clips flying online before Ben even cleared the studio doors. Headlines would write themselves. Ben Shapiro walks off The View after Julia Roberts' showdown. And in that moment, live on national television, the verdict wasn't just clear. It was unforgettable. The dust had barely settled when clips of Ben Shapiro storming off The View hit every corner of the internet. Within minutes, hashtags like Julia owned Ben and Shapiro walks off were trending on X, formerly Twitter. Instagram Reels replayed the exact moment he rose from his chair, frustration written across his face, contrasted with Julia Roberts' calm, steady expression as she sat unmoved in her seat. It was a moment tailor-made for the digital age. The pundit known for rapid-fire dominance suddenly silenced, and the actress famed for her grace and poise emerging as the unshakable voice of compassion. By evening, the fallout was everywhere. Conservative outlets rushed to frame Shapiro as canceled by a liberal mob, while progressive commentators hailed Roberts as the unexpected champion of modern families. But beyond politics, there was something deeper. Viewers across the spectrum were struck by the raw human dynamic they had witnessed. Julia herself refused to spike the football. Later that night, when asked by an entertainment reporter if she felt vindicated, she shook her head softly. It wasn't about me winning anything. It was about showing that families, in all their forms, deserve to be seen and respected. I don't think compassion should ever be controversial. Her humility only magnified the impact. People weren't just talking about her words, they were talking about how she carried herself. Calm under fire, firm without cruelty, honest without grandstanding. To many, Julia Roberts hadn't just defended families, she had modeled the very grace she argued for. Meanwhile, Ben Shapiro faced a reckoning of his own. For years, he had thrived on debates where speed and confidence allowed him to overwhelm opponents. But this wasn't a college stage or a friendly podcast. This was daytime television, where lived experience and emotional truth carried more weight than logical gymnastics. As political analysts pointed out, his decision to walk off wasn't just a tactical mistake, it was symbolic. In a culture war where every gesture matters, leaving the stage read less like strength than surrender. The image of him clutching his papers, eyes cast downward as he exited, would replay endlessly in the days ahead. But beyond the spectacle, the clash raised bigger questions. Families across America debated the moment at their own dinner tables. Some sympathized with Shapiro's concerns about tradition. Others felt Julia gave voice to a generation tired of rigid definitions. Whatever the side, everyone agreed. It was a conversation that couldn't be ignored. Sociologists noted a shift. Moments like these, one wrote, aren't just TV drama, they're cultural touchstones. They mark where society is heading and who's leading the way. And there was Julia Roberts, unintentionally, in that role. Not as a politician, not as an activist with a planned campaign, but as a woman who spoke from the heart, who happened to be sitting across from a man who underestimated her resolve. Weeks later, The View aired a highlight reel of the season's most unforgettable moments. Of course, Julia versus Ben took center stage. The clip drew cheers from the live audience, and Whoopi herself introduced it with a smirk. This was the day Julia Roberts reminded us that Hollywood elegance can pack a punch. The legacy of that day wasn't Ben's walk-off. It was the reminder that decency, empathy, and courage can win, even when the odds look stacked. As one viral post summed it up perfectly, Ben Shapiro argued with facts. Julia Roberts answered with humanity. Humanity won. And that, more than anything else, is why the moment won't fade. It will be replayed, remembered, and reshared as proof that sometimes the quiet voice of compassion can outshine the loudest argument. If you liked this powerful moment, make sure to subscribe for more celebrity clashes, emotional showdowns, and unforgettable TV debates. And drop a comment below. Do you think Ben should have stayed and finished the debate, or was walking off the real answer?